My day had started like any other, drowning in meetings, emails, and the endless grind of corporate life. I returned home that evening exhausted, longing only to relax with Kelly and find solace in her company. But as I picked up my phone, I noticed something unusual, a new message notification flashing on Kelly's tablet, which she had left open on the kitchen counter. I wouldn't have looked if it hadn't been for the preview that caught my eye, two short sentences that froze me in place. I can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. At first, my mind refused to grasp the reality of what I was seeing. Kelly's name was at the top of the conversation, but the sender was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart racing as I scrolled up slowly, praying that I had misunderstood. But there it was, an entire conversation hidden on her device, filled with suggestive messages that painted a very different picture from the life I thought we shared. The name at the top of the conversation was simple, Jared. I racked my memory, trying to recall anyone named Jared that she might have mentioned. Nothing came to mind. My pulse quickened as the truth started to unfold. Jared. He was her tennis coach, a name she'd mentioned occasionally, a figure I had always considered harmless, merely part of her fitness routine. Yet the messages made it clear, my wife was involved with this man. I dropped the tablet onto the counter, a bitter chill sweeping through me as the weight of betrayal settled onto my shoulders. I began pacing the kitchen, every shared memory with Kelly tainted by a sudden wave of doubt. How many nights had she claimed to be at tennis lessons? How many overtime sessions were stolen moments with Jared? My hands clenched, and thoughts raced through my mind. There had to be an explanation, some way to rationalize this, but no amount of reasoning could erase the reality of what I'd seen. At that moment, our home, the one place I believed was safe, had transformed into a theater of deception. My heartbeat drummed loudly in my ears, a mix of shock, disbelief, and a rising tide of rage. How had I missed this? My mind flashed back to odd moments. The times she'd come home flushed from her workouts, the too frequent texts, the excuses she'd made, and the growing distance between us, even in our quietest moments together. I had ignored the signs, convinced myself it was just the stress of work or the mundane drift of our long relationship. But it was more than that. This was betrayal, plain and simple, and now that I knew, I couldn't simply brush it aside. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, my fingers trembling as I took a deep breath, trying to process what was happening. I realized, with a sudden clarity, that this wasn't an ordinary mistake or a forgivable lapse. This was deliberate, and I felt an unsettling need to respond. For now, I wouldn't confront her. Not until I had thought it through. I needed to know more, I had to see it with my own eyes. I wasn't the type to act rashly. And in this case, I wanted both Kelly and her lover to feel a fraction of the pain I was carrying. A dark thought crept into my mind, if she wanted to play games, I would let her. But I would make the rules, and I would ensure they both knew just how wrong they'd been to think I wouldn't notice. I felt something cold and sharp settle over me as I rose from the table, the foundations of a plan beginning to take shape in my mind. The next few days dragged on in a haze of numb disbelief and simmering fury. Each memory with Kelly felt tarnished, every laugh we'd shared, every quiet evening together, now seemed like a carefully crafted lie. The initial shock of discovering her infidelity gripped me like a vice, but it was anger, raw and unfiltered, that began to consume my thoughts. At first, I tried to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that there had to be a reasonable explanation for those messages. I replayed the texts over and over, searching for any hint of ambiguity, any nuance I might have missed. But no, the meaning was clear. The betrayal was real, festering like an open wound I couldn't escape. I found myself scrutinizing every recent interaction with her, turning over every odd moment and change in behavior in my mind. The subtle shifts now made perfect sense. There were the days she'd come home late, her hair still damp from a supposed shower at the gym. I recalled how she'd been checking her phone more than usual, texting with a frequency I'd brushed off as work-related stress. And then there were those extra tennis sessions, which she had explained as ways to improve her game and get more exercise. She'd joked about needing to keep up with him. I had trusted her completely, having convinced myself that her excuses were innocent. But now that I knew the truth, the signs stood out like glaring neon lights, each one stacking up like damning evidence in a trial I hadn't even realized was underway. I thought back to her recent evasiveness, the way she'd turn away slightly when I came close. her mind seemingly elsewhere. Even our conversations felt hollow, as if she had been somewhere far away, unreachable. I had accepted that as just part of the ebb and flow of our relationship, not questioning the distance that had grown between us. The more I pondered, the more my anger grew. How could she look me in the eyes every day, knowing she was living a double life? How could she sit across from me at our table, sharing meals and laughter, while concealing such a dark secret? It felt like an insult to everything we had built together. In a moment of introspection, my rage turned inward. How could I have been so blind? How had I accepted her vague explanations without question? My instincts had warned me, nudging me in small, quiet ways, but I had ignored them, convincing myself it was just my insecurities getting in the way. That realization only sent my anger spiraling back toward Kelly. She had taken advantage of my trust, weaponizing my faith in her to keep me in the dark. I knew I couldn't sit idly by, wallowing in this hurt and anger. Confronting her might provide some temporary release, but it wouldn't change anything. I wanted her to feel this same humiliation, this hollow ache that clawed at me every second. But how? Confronting her head-on felt too simple, too clean. I wanted something deeper, something that would burn as fiercely as her betrayal had. I wanted her to know, without a doubt, just how devastating her choices had been. My anger had sharpened, morphing into something more focused and intense. Confronting Kelly wouldn't be enough. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal before I made my next move. It was time to follow her, to see exactly where she went and what she did when she thought I was none the wiser. The next time Kelly left the house for her tennis lesson, I was ready. I waited until she was out of sight before grabbing my car keys and slipping into the driver's seat. My heart raced as I trailed her through the familiar streets, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed a clear head to face the truth. Kelly's car pulled into the parking lot of the upscale tennis club she frequented. I parked a short distance away, close enough to see her but far enough to avoid being noticed. My stomach twisted as I watched her greet Jared, her coach, with a warmth that went far beyond professionalism. Their easy laughter and comfortable closeness confirmed everything I had feared. The way she interacted with Jared was unmistakably intimate. She looked at him in a way I hadn't seen in months, an ease and spark that she'd once reserved for me. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting the surge of anger threatening to cloud my judgment. I forced myself to focus, to absorb every detail. I watched them walk toward the courts together, their arms brushing against each other, their heads leaned close as they whispered in hushed tones. They shared a private world, while I remained outside, a silent witness to my heartbreak. I waited, each minute stretching painfully as I observed from my car. They played together, their smiles and laughter drifting over the fence that surrounded the courts. I felt my patience fraying, but I stayed put, determined to let this moment etch itself into my memory. Finally, the lesson ended. But instead of parting ways, I watched as Jared and Kelly strolled toward the club's cafe, settling at a table by the window. I strained to make out their expressions, noting the casual, easy way they leaned toward each other, their words punctuated by smiles and small gestures that spoke volumes. I could only imagine what they might be saying, though the specifics barely mattered now. Every shared look, every laugh was a quiet betrayal, proof of how far she'd gone to deceive me. As I watched them together, my sadness morphed into a cold resolve. I couldn't ignore this, couldn't unsee the reality of her double life. I had every piece of evidence I needed, and now I could finally start to think about my response. But it wouldn't be a private confrontation, that felt too insignificant for the weight of her betrayal. No, this would be something different. I wanted her to feel the humiliation I now carried. I'd let her and Jared play out their little game in public, and I'd expose it in a way that would hurt her most. I imagined the faces of our friends and family, watching her carefully constructed lie unravel before their eyes. As Kelly and Jared parted ways, I felt a sliver of satisfaction. The plan was starting to take shape. I sat alone in my office, my mind racing as I began to devise a plan that would expose Kelly's betrayal in a way she'd never forget. Confronting her in private would only give her the chance to deflect, deny, and spin it all as a mistake. But a public revelation, that would cut deeper, stripping away any chance for her to cover up or soften the blow. The more I thought about it, the clearer my intentions became. I wanted her to feel the weight of humiliation I now carried, to watch her carefully crafted facade crumble in front of everyone who mattered to us. But how? Then the idea struck me, the charity tennis match. It was an annual event organized by the club, one Kelly had always loved attending. And it drew a crowd of our friends, colleagues, and local influencers. This year, I would make it unforgettable. I envisioned the scene in my mind, Kelly and her coach, Jared, exposed for what they truly were, right in the middle of the event they'd be eager to attend. My plan started to solidify, each step meticulously designed to maximize the impact. I'd organize the event myself, offering to take over as lead sponsor and inviting our closest friends and colleagues under the guise of a fun day of tennis for a good cause. I would keep things subtle at first, allowing curiosity to simmer among the guests. Just enough hints would slip out about Kelly's closeness with her tennis partner, letting their suspicions grow. I could already see how it would unfold, a chain reaction of glances, whispers, and speculative stares as the truth began to dawn on them. Satisfied with the direction my plan was taking, I started working on the logistics. I contacted the club, offering to cover the costs for the match and requesting access to invite my guests. My list included not only mutual friends and family but also acquaintances from Kelly's work and other respected figures in our social circles. By now, every detail was in my mind. Kelly and Jared would play together, a seemingly innocent team in front of the audience, blissfully unaware that I had turned their charade into a public spectacle. They'd think they were safe, that no one suspected a thing, while I pulled the strings from behind the scenes. A thrill of satisfaction surged through me at the thought of Kelly's face. Her moment of realization as she caught on to what I'd done. She'd have nowhere to hide, no place to run, just as I had felt when I discovered her betrayal. As I sent out the invitations, a cold calm settled over me. The pieces were falling into place, and I could almost see the match unfolding, a stage one had set for the perfect act of revenge. With everything falling into place, I set the final piece of my plan in motion. I knew the charity match alone wouldn't be enough to secure Jared's presence. I had to make the invitation feel authentic, compelling, and above suspicion. If Jared sensed even a hint of unease, he might bow out, and that would ruin the entire setup. So, I took care to reach out as the gracious, unsuspecting husband, genuinely enthusiastic about Kelly's favorite coach joining us for the day. A few days before the match, I called Jared directly, adopting a warm, friendly tone. "Hey, Jared, it's Luke," I began, keeping my voice casual. "I'm calling because we're hosting the charity tennis match this year. And I know how much Kelly's improved working with you. She's been looking forward to this, so I thought it'd be fun to have you both play as a team. I think the crowd would love it." He sounded surprised but pleased, his guard down as he responded, "Oh, wow. Thanks, Luke. That sounds like a great idea. Kelly's been putting in a lot of work, and it'd be nice to showcase that." "I appreciate the invitation." "Absolutely," I replied smoothly. "You've been a huge help for her. This match is a big deal for us. So having someone she's comfortable with on the court will make it even more special." I made sure to inject a note of sincere appreciation, knowing it would appeal to Jared's ego. We chatted briefly about logistics, and I played the attentive husband, casually dropping hints about how important the day was to Kelly. By the end of the call, I could tell that Jared was entirely convinced of my friendliness and support. To complete the ruse, I sent a follow-up email to Jared with all the details, making everything look formal and inviting. I even added a note of thanks. "It'll be a memorable day for Kelly, thanks to you. Looking forward to seeing you both on the court." When I clicked send, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Jared would be there, standing beside Kelly, completely unprepared for the public revelation that was about to unfold. I imagined the moment when his confident smile would falter, replaced by the dawning realization that he was part of an elaborate setup. With Jared's attendance secured, I took a deep breath, feeling my anticipation grow. My plan was nearly complete, each piece falling into place with precision. The charity match would soon begin, and the moment of truth was almost here. The day of the charity tennis match arrived, and I felt a steady, determined calm as I walked into the tennis club. The event had been meticulously arranged, each detail carefully crafted to draw in the audience I wanted. Friends, family, and influential people from the community filled the space. All gathered under the pretense of a charitable cause. I could see their familiar faces mingling in the crowd, completely unaware of the show that was about to unfold. I greeted each guest warmly, my smile masking my true intentions. No one had reason to suspect anything was amiss. After all, this was an annual event, and my decision to take on the organization had been welcomed as a generous gesture. I watched as they settled into the bleachers surrounding the main court, laughing and chatting, ready to enjoy a friendly day of tennis. I had gone to great lengths to ensure everything appeared casual. The match schedule was set, but with a specific twist. I'd arranged for Kelly and Jared to play together, spotlighting their teamwork in front of everyone. It was the perfect setup, and I had hinted to a few key guests about the special dynamic between the two players, feigning amusement as I spoke of Kelly's dedication to her lessons. As the players prepared to take the court, I spotted Kelly arriving, her expression bright and carefree, utterly oblivious to what was about to happen. She looked around, searching for me, and I gave her a wave, watching her face light up in response. Jared was close behind, dressed in his tennis whites, blending into the crowd with practiced ease. They were both exactly where I needed them to be. I took my place near the court, allowing myself a moment to scan the crowd. My subtle hints had sparked a curiosity I could feel building. A few guests exchanged glances, picking up on the unusual nature of the event, their curiosity piqued by the presence of Kelly and her coach as a team. I knew the whispers would grow louder with each passing minute, feeding into the unease I wanted Kelly to feel. As Kelly and Jared warmed up on the court, I saw her glancing toward the stands, noticing the crowd's focused interest in her. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a momentary tension that told me she sensed something was off. But she brushed it away, smiling and focusing on her warm-up, trusting in the innocence of her cover. I felt a thrill of satisfaction watching her. She was just starting to realize that she was the center of attention, and I could see the first hints of discomfort in her movements. The more she noticed, the more she tried to mask her unease, laughing too loudly and making exaggerated gestures with Jared, as though overcompensating for the growing tension around her. The match was about to begin, and I took my place in the announcer's seat, ready to narrate the game for the guests. I deliberately positioned myself to be in control of the microphone, allowing me to frame the event just as I wanted. As the crowd settled, I leaned into the microphone, my voice smooth and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here to support such a great cause. This year, we're excited to bring you something special. Our next team has dedicated countless hours to the game and each other. Their commitment and unique connection is something we're all lucky to witness today. I paused, letting the implication settle, watching the crowd's intrigued glances shift toward Kelly and Jared. My words, though subtle, had cast a hint of intrigue, a question that would linger and fuel the whispers starting to build around the court. Kelly, looking up, seemed to catch something in my tone. Her smile wavered for a split second, and she exchanged a quick, uncertain look with Jared. I felt a rush of satisfaction watching her expression shift as she registered the sudden, focused attention of the audience. She looked confused, her discomfort starting to grow as she realized they were no longer simply players in a friendly charity match, they were the center of a spectacle. Stepping back, I continued my commentary, throwing in the occasional veiled comment about their teamwork and chemistry, each one landing like a small spark, igniting murmurs among the guests. I could sense that they were piecing it together, one insinuation at a time, the whispers growing louder as understanding spread through the crowd. Kelly's smile became strained, her movements hesitant as she noticed the curious stares and murmurs. She missed a shot, something uncharacteristic for her, and Jared leaned over, saying something I couldn't hear, but it only seemed to make her more tense. The easy confidence they'd shared minutes before was starting to fracture, their focus slipping as they tried to maintain their composure under the scrutinizing gaze of the crowd. I allowed myself a small smile, stepping back to observe. Everything was playing out exactly as I had planned. The audience's collective gaze was no longer just that of casual observers, they were witnesses to a hidden truth unraveling in real time. Each glance, each whispered word fueled the spectacle I had orchestrated, and I could see the weight of it settling on Kelly's shoulders. As she prepared to serve, her hands visibly trembled, and she cast another uneasy look at Jared, who was also beginning to sense that something was amiss. I watched as their confidence wavered, their perfect team faltering under the scrutiny of the audience. They were no longer just partners on the court, they were exposed, their facade cracking with every exchanged glance and nervous smile. Satisfied, I stepped back, blending into the crowd, my presence unnoticed as the scene played out just as I'd planned. The seeds of doubt and suspicion had taken root, and Kelly and Jared were left to face the storm they'd unwittingly walked into. I lingered near the edge of the crowd, letting my gaze settle on Kelly and Jared as my plan took hold. The subtle hints I'd dropped had sparked exactly the kind of curiosity I'd intended, and now that curiosity was snowballing into full-blown suspicion. All around me, guests leaned toward each other, whispering and casting sideways glances at the court, where Kelly and Jared struggled to keep their composure under the growing attention. I noticed Susan, one of Kelly's longtime friends, frown as she leaned toward her husband. "Did you notice how close they seem? It's almost as if they're, well, you know." Her husband looked toward the court, eyebrows raised. "You think so? They do seem a bit cozy." He glanced in my direction, and I met his gaze, offering a barely perceptible nod. That was all it took. Susan and her husband's suspicions settled into something close to certainty. I caught snippets of similar conversations around me. A small group from Kelly's office stood huddled together, their eyes darting between her and Jared. Linda, one of her sharper colleagues, whispered, "Kelly's tennis lessons always seemed a bit excessive, didn't they? She was going almost every day last month." The man beside her gave a knowing nod. "Now that you say it, yeah. And look at how she's acting around him. Something's going on." A dark satisfaction simmered within me as I listened to the rumors taking root. The realization was spreading like ripples through water, each person connecting the dots in their way, each coming to the same inevitable conclusion. Kelly was starting to feel it, too. She could sense something off, though she was still oblivious to the exact nature of the whispers. She missed an easy backhand, then glanced nervously at the crowd. Her face was flushed, and I could see the flicker of desperation in her eyes as she searched the bleachers. The easy laughter she'd shared with Jared was gone, replaced by a strained silence as they both tried to maintain a semblance of control. I didn't even have to act. A longtime family friend, Marianne, approached me with her husband, Jack, trailing close behind. Marianne gave me a sympathetic look, lowering her voice as though that would protect me from what she was about to say. "Luke, is everything all right? It seems like something might be going on between Kelly and her coach." I hate to even suggest it, but I gave her a faint, carefully measured smile. "I don't know, Marianne. I suppose people see what they see. I've trusted Kelly for a long time." Jack shook his head, his frown deepening as he watched Kelly fumble with her racket on the court. "I'd never have expected this from her. You deserve better, Luke." His voice was thick with sympathy and a hint of indignation. I knew Jack, like everyone else, was now convinced. The collective realization settled over the crowd, thickening the air with tense, uncomfortable energy. Kelly, fully aware now of the scrutiny, seemed to shrink with each passing moment. Her confidence slipping, her movements awkward and unsteady. I could see the exact moment she began to understand just how much attention was on her and Jared. I let out a slow, steady breath. This was the moment I'd planned for. The crowd's reactions were the validation I'd been waiting for. She was now fully exposed, left to face the silent judgment of everyone she'd deceived. As the tension on the court reached a boiling point, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The electric charge in the air seemed to build around me, each pair of eyes trained on the drama that was unfolding. Lifting the microphone to my lips, I prepared to say the words that would cement everything. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, letting my voice carry across the crowd. "Kelly and Jared," I said, emphasizing each name, "have been a dynamic duo both on the court and—" I let the words hang, every eye now trained on me, waiting for the next line, "off the court." "Isn't that right?" I could feel the ripple of shock spread through the crowd. The curiosity, the glances, the questions, everything turned to stunned silence. Kelly's eyes widened, her face draining of color as she registered the meaning behind my words. I reveled in the flicker of panic dancing in her gaze. I pressed on, allowing myself the satisfaction of watching her crumble. "I think we can all agree," I said, my tone turning sharper, "that the connection they've built during those endless hours of practice goes beyond mere coaching." I paused again, my eyes on her as I let the implications sink in. "It's clear to all of us here today that there's something special happening between them." As my words lingered in the air, I watched her expression shift from confusion to horror. Her hand shook slightly as she gripped her racket, and she looked at Jared, who was still stunned, clearly struggling to grasp the depth of the situation. I knew this was the moment she realized their carefully hidden secret was about to unravel, right here, in front of everyone. A ripple of gasps coursed through the crowd as my words settled in. The weight of the revelation hung in the air, and whispers quickly grew louder, fueled by shock and disbelief. I watched as guests leaned in closer, their eyes darting between Kelly and Jared, the atmosphere thick with accusation and suspicion. Kelly's mouth opened in disbelief, her voice faltering. "Luke, what are you talking about? This isn't," but I wasn't about to let her escape so easily. I stepped into her space, my tone steady and unwavering. "I think we all deserve to know the truth. Don't you? The truth about the extra training sessions and the close bond that has developed between a devoted wife and her coach." Jared's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension, his posture stiffening. He looked between Kelly and me, realization crashing over him like a freight train. "Wait, Luke, this isn't fair." I raised my hand to silence him. "Fairness? This is about honesty, Jared. Maybe you should have thought of that before crossing the line." The audience was fully engaged now. Their interest peaked. Kelly stood frozen, caught in the storm of public scrutiny. The truth she had tried so hard to keep hidden was now laid bare for all to see. The laughter and joviality of the match had vanished, replaced by the harsh reality of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, my voice ringing clear, "it's time we address the elephant in the room. Kelly and Jared's relationship. What kind of example does that set for us all?" I gestured widely to the crowd, allowing them to feel the weight of my words. "Here we are, supposed to be supporting a good cause, and yet..." Kelly's face was a mix of disbelief and rage, but her words were lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. She looked at Jared, who finally seemed to grasp the situation, panic spreading across his face as he took a step back. "Luke, please," Kelly pleaded, her voice cracking. "You don't have to do this." But I leaned in closer, the microphone amplifying my every word. "Oh, but I do. You see, this isn't just about a match or a charity event. It's about integrity and trust. It's about facing the consequences of your actions." At that moment, I saw the realization hit Kelly like a wave, her deception now public knowledge. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, judgment palpable as their gazes fixed on her with a mix of sympathy and disdain. "Welcome to your reckoning, Kelly," I said, my voice steady, savoring the moment. I stepped back, watching as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The once glamorous facade of her life was crumbling, leaving her exposed and vulnerable, a public spectacle for all to witness. And with that, I felt a rush of triumph. The truth was out, and this was just the beginning of the chaos that would follow. As the gravity of my words settled over the crowd, I watched Kelly's world unravel in a way she had never anticipated. The initial shock in her eyes shifted to horror as she grasped the full extent of the situation. The audience was no longer simply spectators, they were witnesses to her betrayal. And that realization twisted in her stomach like a knife. "Luke, how could you?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "You're making a mistake. This isn't what it looks like." But her denial was met with skepticism from the crowd. Whispers floated through the air, echoing around the tennis club like the tolling of a bell. "What does she mean? Is it not what it looks like?" I took a step back, letting the moment hang heavy. I watched as Kelly's face flushed with embarrassment, her eyes darting around the court. Seeking support from the crowd, from Jared, from anyone. The sanctuary she had once felt in her affair was shattered, leaving nothing but the stark reality of her betrayal exposed under the spotlight. Jared's expression shifted from confusion to concern, and he stepped forward, trying to interject. "This isn't right, Luke. You can't just air this out in front of everyone." His voice strained, caught between loyalty to Kelly and the growing realization of their precarious situation. But I wasn't swayed. And why shouldn't I? She made her choices, Jared. She made her bed, and now she has to lie in it, right here, in front of all our friends and family. Kelly's breath quickened, panic overtaking her as she felt the crowd's eyes pressing down on her. She turned her gaze back to me, desperation flooding her voice. "Please, Luke, I never meant for it to happen like this. I didn't want anyone to find out." I crossed my arms, a calmness about me that only heightened her anxiety. "But it's too late for that, isn't it? You had your chance, to be honest. You had your chance to come clean." I paused, letting my words sink in, watching as realization dawned in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed to say, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Her gaze dropped to the ground, shame flooding her as she stood before people who had once respected her, now questioning her every move. For a brief moment, my expression softened. But I quickly masked it with indifference. Sorry isn't enough, Kelly. You made your choices, and now we all have to live with the consequences. The weight of my words hung in the air, sealing her fate. In that instant, she knew there would be no easy way out, no escape from the truth that had just been laid bare. The reckoning had come, and she was left to face it, alone. The gravity of the situation settled over the tennis court like a heavy fog. The initial shock morphed into a tide of whispers that surged through the crowd. Rippling with judgment and speculation, guests leaned closer to one another, their hushed conversations filled with disbelief and disdain, as they scrutinized Kelly and Jared. I stood aside, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and detachment. Can you believe this? A woman murmured to her friend, her voice barely above a whisper. I always thought Kelly was so perfect. How could she do this? Another voice chimed in, tinged with incredulity. I knew something was off. She's been acting strange for months now. But this? It's unbelievable. The whispers swirled around Kelly, wrapping her in a suffocating cocoon of judgment. I could see her discomfort, the way she felt the heat of their gazes burning into her, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her shoulders. Every word they exchanged was like a dagger, piercing her already fragile state. She had worked so hard to maintain her facade, and now it was crumbling right before her eyes. I could almost feel her rising emotions as she clenched her fists at her sides. The shame flooding through her was palpable, a bitter tide threatening to drown her. The whispers intensified, swirling around her like a tempest, drowning out everything else. My gaze remained fixed on her, tall and unwavering, a smirk playing on my lips. It felt like I was feeding off her despair, reveling in the humiliation I had orchestrated. Did you hear what Luke said? A man remarked, shaking his head. What a way to expose her like that. It's ruthless. Maybe she deserves it, came a reply, laced with disdain. She broke trust. What did she expect? I caught the way Kelly's heart sank as she caught fragments of their conversation. The sting of their judgment was unbearable, and I reveled in it. The people she had once considered friends were turning into strangers, their expressions twisted with disappointment and disbelief. She had painted a picture of a perfect life, and in a matter of moments, that image shattered, leaving only the raw truth of her betrayal in its wake. Jared, who had been trying to maintain his composure, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of the moment. The whispers that had once seemed distant were now a cacophony of condemnation, and he too was caught in the net of scrutiny. Jared, how could you let this happen? Someone called from the crowd, their voice dripping with judgment. You're supposed to be her coach. I watched as Jared's face reddened, fumbling for a response. He began, but the words caught in his throat. There was no justification for what had transpired, no way to explain the choices that had led them to this moment. Meanwhile, I could see Kelly standing there, paralyzed by the weight of her shame, a mix of anger and despair bubbling to the surface. I could almost sense her desire to scream, to lash out against the judgment raining down upon her. But all she could do was stand in silence, a puppet on strings, manipulated by her own choices. Then the whispers turned even more personal. I never liked her, one woman admitted to her friend. She always acted so superior, like she was better than everyone else. I guess she isn't so special after all. I noticed Kelly's breath hitch at the cutting remarks. The sting of their words cut deeper than any physical blow. In that moment, she felt like a pariah, an outcast in a place that had once felt like home. The community she had been a part of was now alien, their acceptance replaced with disdain. Look at her, another voice chimed in. I can't believe she thought she could get away with it. The nerve. Finally, the reality hit her. This was no longer just about her and me, it was about the lives she had impacted with her choices. Friends, acquaintances, even those she barely knew were suddenly part of her reckoning. They had all witnessed the unraveling of her carefully crafted image, and the fallout was more devastating than she had anticipated. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. This was what I had wanted, truth exposed, reputations shattered, and her carefully built world collapsing around her. Each murmur and judgment felt like a victory, a confirmation that I had succeeded in revealing her betrayal to the world. As the echoes of the crowd's whispers began to fade, I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me, fueling my resolve. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, but I was past the point of caring. The truth was out, and the realization of Kelly's betrayal lay bare for everyone to see. I could see her standing there, a shell of the confident woman I once knew, crumbling under the judgment of our friends and family. It was time to finish what I had started. I walked toward her, each step deliberate, feeling the tension in the air shift as the crowd parted, eyes darting between us like moths drawn to a flame. I could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. Perhaps she thought I would back down, that somehow I would take pity on her. But that was the last thing on my mind. "Luke, please," she begged, her voice trembling, a mix of desperation and fear. "You don't have to do this. We can talk. We can figure this out." I held my ground, refusing to let her manipulative charm sway me any longer. "Figure this out?" I echoed, my tone steady. "There's nothing left to discuss, Kelly. You've made your choices, and I'm done pretending they don't exist." Her expression twisted with confusion and hurt. The mask of composure she'd worn so effortlessly now shattered. "I didn't want anyone to find out. I never meant for it to happen like this." "Maybe not, but it did," I replied, a cool edge to my voice. "And now you have to face the consequences." The air between us felt charged, a tense silence settling as I prepared to deliver the final blow. Taking a deep breath, I said the words I had rehearsed countless times in my mind, the words that would sever the last ties binding us together. "I filed for divorce, Kelly. It's done." The look on her face was a mixture of disbelief and anguish, as if I had struck her physically. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, just the sound of her ragged breathing filling the space between us. I could see the reality of what I was saying hit her, the finality of it crashing down like a wave. "Divorce? You can't be serious." She stammered, shaking her head as if trying to will the truth away. "You don't mean that." "I do," I replied, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. "You've betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, and I won't stand for it. I deserve better than this." The words came out stronger than I expected, each one a reaffirmation of my decision. In that moment, I saw the mask of confidence she had worn crumble completely, leaving only despair in its wake. I had wanted to see her squirm, to feel the sting of her betrayal laid bare before others, but witnessing her devastation was far more than I had anticipated. I took a step back, watching as the reality settled in around her, leaving her vulnerable and alone. The crowd had shifted their attention, some still whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I could feel their judgmental eyes, but I didn't care. This was about me now, about reclaiming my dignity and moving on from the wreckage of our marriage. With one last look at Kelly, her expression etched with heartbreak and regret, I turned and walked away, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hollow silence that had settled around us. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a sense of liberation flooding in. I was free.